For a moment, imagine going to the cinema with a partner or a friend. You're sitting side by side on a cinema chair with some popcorn and a drink at the ready. You're staring at the big screen. The lights dim, and first come the adverts. After a while, the trailers follow, and just as you've eaten half the popcorn, the film begins. And you both settle in for the next couple of hours to watch the film. The exact same film. You both see the same visual effects. You both hear the same dialogue. You both share the same space. And then the film finishes. The lights come up, and as you walk outside the cinema, you start to talk about the film. One of you loved it. The other couldn't stand it. One emotionally moves, the other completely bored. Not because the film changed, of course, but because your experience of the film was created within you. It was created by your thoughts, emotions, feelings, memories, expectations, and other complex internal mechanisms. The meaning you made shaped the experience you had, and it felt factual. It felt like truth. So much so that if you both spoke to two different people the very next day, one of you would say, "Loved the film, go and watch it." The other would say, "It was a dreadful film, don't go and watch it." And of course, this is how stories work. They don't change the event. They shape the experience of the event. Human beings have always been powerful storytellers via authoring books, poems, songs, scripts for TV, films, the stage, and talks like this one. Stories help us think and feel. They help us understand. They teach, they warn, they connect. They pass meaning from one generation to the next. Stories have always been powerful in our world. Perhaps you have a favourite author. Maybe you have a favourite director. But I would argue that the stories that most influence us are not always the ones authored by others. They are often the ones that we don't realise that we are creating ourselves. We are powerful, creative, and imaginative beings, but we forget. On the 22nd of April of 2002, I was a 17-year-old lad chilling in my bedroom in a 3-storey townhouse in Gosport, Hampshire. I lived with my mother, my stepdad and sister, but it was just me and my mum in the house at that particular time. The house phone rang. It was a long time ago. The house phone rang. My mum was in the shower, and I was a 17-year-old lad chilling in my bedroom, so obviously I didn't get it. Downstairs felt like a very long way to go at that time. But then her mobile rang from the next room, and I thought, if someone had called the house phone and then her mobile, it must have been someone important or about something important. So I decided to get up, go to my mum's room, and I answered her mobile, probably like an old 3310, Nokia 3310 or whatever it was like that. It was my older brother on the phone. To give you some additional context, my older brother, aged 21, and our middle brother, Kevin, aged 18, lived with my dad in Pembrokeshire. We were a few hundred miles away. My older brother told me that he'd had some news and that I'd better sit down. I remember walking back into my bedroom, sitting at the side of my bed. And he told me that Kevin had been in a car accident and that he died. He died suddenly upon impact. I remember getting up from my bed, walking around the room, and asked him if he was joking, and his reply was, "It'd be a pretty sick joke if it was." It must have been a devastating phone call for him to make, and certainly a devastating one to receive. I didn't really know what to do, but I knew it was my job to tell our mum. Soon after, she came out of the shower and out of the bathroom, and I followed her into the bedroom. I told her about the phone call I told her that Kevin had been in a car accident and that he died. Her legs gave way and she fell to the floor. Probably a reason why people tell you to sit down. Her world crumbled before me. Her inability to speak due to the emotional cries of pain. I remember lifting her up to the bed. I was on the phone. I tried to speak to my dad, but he couldn't speak. I remember being passed to a police officer to make sense of the situation, and back and forth to different people. And to be honest, I couldn't tell you really what happened next. Now, you may think that this is a story around grief and loss, and you wouldn't be wrong, but it's only half the story. See, a few days later, I was sitting on the bottom of my father's staircase in Pembrokeshire. My auntie came over and she sat beside me on my left. And she told me that she was there for me and that I could talk to her at any point, now or any point. And of course, I smiled and I nodded and I knew, yes, of course. She had always been a supportive person in my life. And I consider myself to be very fortunate. Actually, I had a supportive and loving family, friends and a partner at the time. Yes. But I couldn't speak to her or anyone else for that matter, not because I wasn't supported, but because of the quiet meaning that had been created in the background. I was in so much emotional pain that I felt that if I shared my words, I would transfer that pain to others. Other people were already in pain, and I didn't want to be the cause of anybody else feeling any more pain. And so the quiet narrative just began unconsciously in the background. But out of all the metrics of success, I've still lived a good life. I didn't realize that this story was being unconsciously running in the background. I was taught the importance of self-achievement in face of adversity. I ran the London Marathon at age 19. I had a family. I went back to college. I had a family, had children, went to university, built a career. And of course, all these stories, they go underneath in the background. And two narratives can coexist at the same time. You can be successful and still be insecure. How many outwardly successful people do you know that still feel inwardly constrained? It wasn't until I was about 32 years old, that something had really shifted. About 10 years ago now. As a social worker, I worked with children, young people and families. And I was on a search to come out of the realm of social work to help to build my new skills and knowledge base to better help others. I wanted to really understand what shaped people's experiences so I could better support them. I was never taught that my feelings were created by my moment-to-moment experience. The work that I was doing was around where your energy goes, where your focus goes, your energy goes. That our moment-to-moment is created by our moment-to-moment experience. That peace is within us all if we just learn to leave ourselves alone. And a quote from Sydney Banks that I've always liked is that when you understand the nature of thought, you no longer have to fear your experience. So amidst all this work, something shifted myself. I was running through the countryside one day. Now, I don't run with headphones. I like to process my day, just to let myself wander. And seemingly out of nowhere, I had an insight, a light bulb moment, a thought that changed everything. The thought, I wasn't a bad person. I didn't realize until that point that the quiet narrative that existed for the last 15 years was that I had felt like a bad person, specifically if I was open and honest with people. I'd hurt my mum with my words all those years ago, and I couldn't stand the thought of hurting people. Paradoxically, I'm sure there were times that because I wasn't open and honest with people, probably was a bit of a dick at times. Because there's only so much hurt people can take without it going somewhere. So as I was doing all this work, I came to the realization that our moment-to-moment experience and my moment-to-moment experience wasn't being created by the events of 2002. That the event was real and the emotions were real. But the event itself wasn't the factor. It was the story that I created in the background. And this is not a new idea, actually. Epictetus, a Stoic Greek philosopher, once said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the meanings we give to them." Alfred Adler, and the author of, or the founder of individual psychology, also had a philosophy called individual perception, where he said that our meanings or our experience are created by the meanings we give to them. And like Dr. Gabor Mate often says, trauma is not just what happens to us, but what happens within us because of what happens. We don't do this consciously. It's automatic and it's unconscious, and it's problematic when we're not taught it. We're not taught that our emotions come from our thoughts in the moment and not from the events. And it's not to dismiss the things that people go through. It's to realize that we create our own stories. We are incredibly powerful human beings. We look for validation and compassion from others because of our experience. And that can help, of course, because who doesn't like someone who agrees with us? But that can equally and also support the keeping of the same story. We need to be able to pause and reflect. We need to be able to ask ourselves, what is the story running the show? And what can I do about it? We are incredibly powerful and creative and imaginative human beings. We don't have to be tied down by the stories that we create. But we do have to understand that we do create our own stories. When we see that we are the ultimate author of our experience, then new beginnings become possible. Thank you.